Personally, I would say in class I ask this and students will say that they have price standards for products that they buy, such as clothes. They probably won't pay over $25 for clothes if they're being budget wise. They will also not pay over $3 for an avocado, for an example. Yes, I agree with that. So if I walk into Foodland and the apples are $5 a pound, I won't buy them because they're too expensive. I have a standard price that I don't want to exceed. Quantity standards, if you've ever been to Subway and you've seen how they scoop up your meat in a pre-measured scooping device and they will level it off, that's a standard quantity because they want every sandwich to have pretty much the same amount on that sandwich. Also, I've seen at Seasider they will use scales to weigh out, the quantity of ice cream or quantity of acai they're using, and so that's a quantity standard or a specific amount that should be used in each product. And so these standard costs help us to understand deviations from standards, also known as management by exception. If we have all this wastage and we're using a lot of quantity, we would want to go investigate, and it's more than we are expecting, we would go investigate and see what's happening. And maybe it's a new worker that accidentally spilled all the ice cream on the floor, right? So that could be a reason why that we are overspending or having a lot of expenses in one area of our company. And this is a different standard, but some gospel insight in scriptural context. An ensign or a standard is a flag around which people would gather in unity of purpose. In ancient times, a standard served as a rallying point for soldiers in battle. Symbolically speaking, the Book of Mormon and the Restored Church of Jesus Christ are standards to all nations. So different kind of standard, but we're talking about standards here. Setting direct labor standards, standard rate per hour. So employees could be paid minimum wage or specific rate, but that could fluctuate if you have to pay them overtime rates, which are usually more expensive. Standard hours per unit, how much labor does this unit require? How many hours does it need? We could have a standard for that. Also price standard, quantity standard, prices fluctuate with supply and demand. Quantity standard, how much should we be using? You could have an unskilled worker that uses a lot or makes a lot of mistakes, and that could affect your quantity standards. Okay, so the purchasing quantity and price standards are determined separately for two reasons. The purchasing manager is responsible for raw material purchase prices, which means they're also responsible for price variances. So this would be your purchasing manager, and the production manager is responsible for the quantity of raw material used, which means the production manager is responsible for quantity variances. So let's go to our lecture assignment here. I've already inserted what are standard costs. They're norms or benchmarks for measuring performance, like a standard price or standard quantity. We set our standard costs. Who is responsible for price variances? This would be our purchasing manager. And who's responsible for quantity variances? Production manager. So that's number 2 and number 3 from that previous slide. What's the formula for price and quantity variances? So purchasing manager is in charge of price variances, and production manager is responsible for quantity variances. And remember, if there's anything greater or less than what we were expecting, that would be our management by exception. We would go investigate and try to understand what's happening with these fluctuations or deviations. Okay, so we're getting into our price and quantity variances. I will try to draw them, but pretty much we do AAA, SSS, QP, QP, QP. So I normally write this out on the whiteboard for students, and I write A and a little space A and another space A, and then I write another little space S, 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 and then I write QP, 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 because I usually have the students memorize this, and this helps with memorization so that they can use it on the exam and remember that memorization tactic. But you can just look at the formula and do it with open book, open note, not open neighbor exams. But let me see if I can try to draw it out so you can visualize what I'm saying. And this has kind of been not super clean, so just bear with me. A, A, S, S, S. I don't know why it does that large line. QP, QP, QP. QP, QP, QP. Sorry about those crazy lines. Okay. So when we multiply these two, actual quantity multiplied by actual price, we'll compare this to actual quantity multiplied by standard price, and then standard quantity multiplied by standard price. So it sometimes helps, maybe if you're writing it on your notebook, I would always just say AAA, SSS, QP, QP, QP. This will also work for your direct labor variances, but instead of Q and P, which stands for quantity and price, and A stands for actual and S stands for standard, you would do AAA, SSS, HR, HR, HR for labor, right? So labor hours and labor rate. But this one will be for our direct materials with quantity and price. So this is how I would write it on the board, a little bit messy, so you can just refer to this one. Actual quantity, standard quantity, actual price, and standard price. So actual price, what they had paid, and standard price here. And sometimes you'll buy a larger quantity. The actual quantity will be greater than what you actually use in production. So there'll be differences depending on if you buy more than you actually use in quantities. So there's your AAA, SSS, QP, QP, QP. AAA, SSS, QP, 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 like I was saying before. Or you could use this formula method. However you want to get to the correct answer, that's what we're going to use. And we talked about this before. So let's get into a problem. A, S, 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 Q, U, P, Q, P, Q, P. Just one more time. Okay, so we'll multiply these two together and then compare it to these two. And then we can find our price and our quantity variance. So whenever we're looking at this formula, we will want to hide one side. So pretend like this side's not here. And we will look at actual quantity multiplied by actual price, actual quantity multiplied by standard price. And so if you look at these two equations, is this a quantity variance or is this a price variance? Well, I can see that this AQ is constant because it's on both sides. But what's changing is the actual price versus the standard price. So this is a price variance because the actual price is compared to the standard price. But when we look at the other side, we'll take this down to the other side. Okay, so that's your price variance. And over here, when I look at AQ and SQ, they're changing, but S standard price is the same. So this would be our quantity variance. And then we can compare the two, and that could be our total purchasing variance if you want to look at both of them all together. So let's get into a problem. Glacier Peak Outfitter